Chapter 871. Xu Shaowen's expression had already changed drastically as she saw what Tang Wuling was doing, and she'd managed to summon her dazzling starlight just in the nick of time, sending countless specks of starlight hurtling directly toward Tang Wuling. The specks of starlight instantly encompassed his entire body, but at that point, his golden dragon spear had already left his grasp. He then immediately unleashed his golden dragon tyrant body, and in the instant that the dazzling starlight reached him, he did something that was rather strange looking. He positioned one hand above and curled his fingers back to form claws with both his palms facing one another. After that, he stepped forward with his left foot, and it looked as if he were trying to catch something. Yue Hangyu's expression instantly changed at the sight of the oncoming golden dragon spear. His light of judgment had already struck Tang Wuling's body, but it had also been too slow to prevent Tang Wuling from hurling his golden dragon spear. The light of judgment was absorbed by Tang Wuling's golden dragon tyrant body, and his mirror-like suit of battle armor began to shimmer rapidly. At this moment, the dazzling starlight had already immobilized him. Yue Hangyu positioned himself in front of Xu Shaowen and thrust his holy sword forward with all his might to try and keep the golden dragon spear at bay. However, the golden dragon spear hadn't even reached him, and he could already sense that he wouldn't be able to block it. He was sure that even with the enhancements of his bloodthirsty red beam bun and battle armor that the golden dragon spear would still puncture his body with ease. Right at this moment, a sharp sword projection finally arrived before striking the side of the golden dragon spear with unerring accuracy. A loud dragon's roar rang out from the spear, and the golden light around it dimmed slightly before it struck Yue Hangyu's holy sword. Even though Yingling had already nullified most of the golden dragon spear's power, Yue Hangyu still shuddered violently from the force of the clash, and he rushed back as if he'd been electrocuted, almost crashing into Xu Shaowen as he did so. The golden dragon spear was repelled, and the holy sword was broken. As such, the only one who was still rushing toward Tang Wuling was Yuan and Yue. Tang Wuling was attacking Xu Shaowen as he knew that the others would be forced to save her, and in the face of the threat from his golden dragon spear, Yingling had no choice but to turn back. The giant hammers were raised aloft before being brought down with devastating might. In Yuan and Yue's eyes, Tang Wuling had been immobilized by the dazzling starlight, and his golden dragon tyrant body had also been activated by the light of judgment. If he were to retaliate now, he would be extremely difficult to handle, but his defenses were also at their most feeble at this moment. In order to save time, she didn't use any cell skills, but she was still unleashing this attack with the full power of her devil titan form. I've got him. A hint of elation welled up in Yuan and Yue's heart, but right at this moment, she felt a strange rotational force surge toward her from Tang Wuling's body. Her giant hammer was supposed to strike him on the chest, but it was suddenly twisted toward him, and her body also began to spin. As a result, the instant that the giant hammer fell into Tang Wuling's hands coincided with the moment that he recovered the dazzling starlight. Yet instead of attacking Yuan and Yue with the hammer, he held it toward Xu Shaowen again. A burst of sharp light flashed past Tang Wuling, reaching Yuan and Yue in a flash. It was none other than Shi. Yuan and Yue was still trying to arrest her rotational momentum, yet Shi was completely fine as Tang Wuling had blocked the dazzling starlight for him. As such, he was able to unleash all of his accumulated power at this critical juncture in the form of this attack. His body had split up into two clones, one illusionary and one substantial, and the two of them attacked Yuan and Yue from both sides. All of a sudden, a loud dragon's roar erupted from Tang Wuling's body as a golden ring of light lit up beneath his feet. It was none other than his fourth bloodline soul skill, violent golden dragon domain. Shi had some dragon clan bloodline in his body, so he benefited more from the violent golden dragon domain's enhancement effects than everyone else did. He could feel his own bloodline aura elevating drastically, and his two clones reached Yuan and Yue in a flash. Shi. Right at this moment, a strange turn of events unfolded. Instead of adopting any defensive or evasive measures, Yuan and Yue withdrew both of her hands, and her body instantly shrank down as she reverted back to her original form. At the same time, she added Shishi's name in an extremely mellow voice. Her voice was so soft and gentle that it was virtually a croon, and if someone were to stand beside Shishi to inspect his skin with a magnifying glass, they'd discover that goosebumps had appeared all over his body. The two clones flashed past Yuan and Yue, but both of them had withdrawn their daggers, and neither of them attacked her. Yuan and Yue smiled as she turned around before lashing out with both of her legs, kicking the two Shishis on their backsides to send them flying into the protective barrier. Tang Wuling was completely speechless. Yuan and Yue was in a completely dire situation, yet Shishi had dropped the ball at the most critical juncture. A 2-on-5 battle was already a format that was heavily against his favor, so he had to think outside of the box if he wanted to win. Xu Shaowen was their biggest threat, so Tang Wuling hurled projectiles at her to restrict her, then created an opportunity to single out Yuan and Yue. Even though he'd been immobilized, as long as Shishi could take her out, the equation would become 2 versus 4 as opposed to 2 versus 5, and that would be a lot easier. However, Shishi had truly screwed up. Not only had he been set flying, he collapsed to the ground and couldn't get up. Yuan and Yue had sealed his bloodline once again. The hammer that Tang Wuling had hurled was far less powerful than his golden dragon spear. It didn't have the same speed and sharpness, so Yingling was able to divert it away on her own. Tang Wuling unleashed a powerful punch to send Yuan and Yue flying, but he didn't actually inflict any substantial damage to her as the astral chains allowed them to distribute the impact among all 5 of them. You cheated. You can't do that. Tang Wuling exclaimed with grief and indignation. Yuan and Yue chuckled. We just came back from the demonic island. Captain, have you forgotten everything we've learned there already? Before her voice had even trailed off, Yingling and Yue Hangyu had also joined her to attack Tang Wuling from 3 sides. A star wheel shackle also appeared beneath his feet with unerring accuracy. As such, Tang Wuling had no choice but to unleash his golden dragon tyrant body again, while adopting the same strange-looking pose as before. Strangely enough, after he adopted that pose, everyone who attacked him would immediately be sent flying. Even Yuan and Yue's immense power was unable to break through his strange defense, let alone everyone else. Even Yingling felt as if her star god sword had plunged into a vortex before she was sent flying by the rotational force. Through the use of this strange pose, Tang Wuling endured one barrage of attacks after another. However, he was being attacked by 5 people all at once. His friends also had Xu Shaowen's absolute control on their side, and Tang Wuling couldn't do anything aside from defend. What made him even more speechless was that Xu Lizzie was the one who broke his defense in the end. While he was being attacked by everyone else, Xu Lizzie snuck behind him without him noticing before imprinting a pair of blackish-purple hands onto his back. As such, Tang Wuling was distracted by the immense destructive energy surging into his body, thereby preventing him from adopting that strange pose before he was struck by the dazzling starlight and star wheel shackle. 5 minutes later, Tang Wuling was bruised and battered as he sat on the trial grounds with a gloomy expression. She didn't even dare to look at him. Yue Hangyu wore a smug expression as he said, "You see now, Captain? Having a trashy teammate is worse than having to face godlike opponents. If I were you, I'd be challenging him to a one-on-one battle right now." They hadn't held back in the slightest after mobbing Tang Wuling. However, his defensive prowess stunned them once again. All 3 of them were assault system soul masters, but Tang Wuling acted as their punching bag for a full 5 minutes before he finally chose to surrender. During this process, he had almost escaped on multiple occasions, only to be thwarted by Xu Shaowen's absolute control. It was undoubtedly the case that without Xu Shaowen's ultra-powerful control abilities, there was no guarantee that they would have been able to defeat Tang Wuling. Even if they could, they'd have to pay a price in the process. Chapter 872. The bruises on Tang Wuling's face were quickly fading. With his recovery abilities, these minor injuries were nothing. Shishi wore a guilty expression as he said, "I'm sorry, boss, but I didn't do it on purpose. Yuan's never talked to me like that before. I swear this won't happen next time." Tang Wuling glared at him. "There won't be a next time. What if she calls you husband next time? Are you going to turn around and stab me instead?" Shishi raised his head and looked at Tang Wuling before glancing at Yuan and Yue. There was indeed a very good chance that that would happen. In the face of Yuan and Yue, all of his combat prowess was thrown out the window. Tang Wuling sent Shishi flying with another kick to the backside, and everyone burst into raucous laughter. Yuan and Yue put on a disdainful expression as she scoffed. "Don't even think about it. There's no way I'm calling you that." Tang Wuling heaved a resigned sigh. "I've ascertained your current abilities and needs. I'm going to devise individual plans, then discuss them with each of you. Let's stop here for today." Everyone departed, and Tang Wuling returned to his and Gu Yue's wooden cabin. Only now did he allow a hint of dejection to appear on his face. All of his friends were in happy relationships, so it was naturally unavoidable for him to be envious. However, there was nothing he could do. He still hadn't received any news about Gu Yue and Naya even after all this time. Where were they? Are you really never going to see me again? Wait for me. I'm going to become powerful enough to go and find you. A soul bus traveled quickly over the highway. The bus appeared to be extremely normal and was no different from the average soul bus. The only thing that was different was that all of the windows were concealed by drawn curtains, making it impossible to see what was inside the bus. The Shrek City checkpoint loomed up ahead in the distance, and the soul bus gradually decelerated, lining up behind all of the other vehicles that were waiting to be checked. Right at this moment, an employee in an official uniform emerged from the checkpoint. From the looks of his epaulets, he was clearly quite an important figure at the checkpoint. He quickly made his way out of the checkpoint before waving a hand at the soul bus, then pointing at a closed tunnel off to the side. The soul bus reacted very quickly and immediately left the line, changing directions before driving toward the tunnel. The employee entered the tunnel before switching on the devices inside, and the door of the bus was opened, following which a middle-aged man with an extremely ordinary appearance disembarked from within. The middle-aged man strode over to the employee before handing over some documents. The employee glanced at the documents before returning it to the man, then making his way into the control room. The metal barrier blocking the tunnel slowly rose up, and the middle-aged man got onto the bus again before driving it toward Shrek City. The metal barrier was lowered again, and the employee also emerged from the control room. This tunnel was going to remain closed. This occurrence didn't attract much attention from anyone else. After all, there were people with special rights and privileges everywhere, and even Shrek City was no exception to this. However, unbeknownst to everyone, after allowing the soul bus into Shrek City, the employee went straight back to the lobby of the checkpoint before changing into some different clothes. He then bade farewell to his colleagues and got onto a soul car that quickly departed. The soul car didn't take him towards Shrek City. Instead, it was taking him away into the distance. More and more cars appeared on the road, and the soul bus slowed down while continuing to travel on ahead. There were a total of over 10 people in the bus, and all of them were completely silent. They all wore black uniforms with balaclavas on their faces that only revealed their nose and eyes. Due to their attire, the entire interior of the soul bus had a sinister air about it. Only the driver, who was also the middle-aged man that had just gotten off the soul bus earlier, seemed to be quite normal. One of the men in black sitting near the front quickly made his way to the back before asking in a serious voice, "How's it going with the screening devices?" Another man in black pulled out a device and took a glance at it before nodding in response. "Everything is normal. Nothing is being leaked aside from background radiation." "Very good." The first man in black returned to the front of the bus and said to the driver, "Proceed as planned." "Yes." The driver replied in a respectful manner. At the same time, a hint of deranged fanaticism appeared in his eyes. The soul bus continued onward and quickly entered Shrek City. The inner city of Shrek City gradually appeared in their field of view. However, the bus didn't continue on toward the inner city. Instead, it turned onto a wide street before driving for a while longer, then gradually decelerated. The bus stopped on the side of the street beside a building that appeared to be a hotel, and the doors of the building slowly opened. The bus drove into the building through the entrance, where it disappeared from the public eye. On the Sea God's Island, Atlas Douluo Youngming was sitting on his wooden bed with his legs crossed, and as he slowly opened his eyes, a hint of unease flashed through his pupils. "Yali," he called out in a gentle voice. "What is it?" Holy Spirit Douluo Yali immediately walked in from outside. She could clearly sense that there was something off about Youngming's voice. "For some reason, I'm feeling rather uneasy," Youngming said in a rather perplexed voice. Yali was stunned to hear this. "What? You're feeling uneasy?" One had to realize that Youngming was a limit Douluo, and was widely renowned as the most powerful being on the entire continent, placing him at the pinnacle of the world of soul masters. His sensory abilities were countless times more potent than that of the average person, and his spiritual power had already reached the spirit domain realm. His senses were so powerful that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to claim that he could detect all of the major changes taking place on the entire Douluo continent. The fact that he was feeling uneasy indicated that a major event was about to take place. For example, he'd been struck by a sense of foreboding prior to the Heaven Dou City terrorist attack, and he'd immediately reported this feeling to the Federation. Unfortunately, the Federation wasn't able to address his report in a timely fashion, and the tragedy of Heaven Dou City still took place. "Is it a really strong sense of unease? Which direction is it coming from?" Yali asked. Youngming's brows were tightly furrowed as he shook his head. "It's a very strong feeling, but it's also very strange. The feeling fluctuates in intensity, and I can't pinpoint which direction it's coming from. This is really strange. Could it be that a natural disaster is about to strike?" Yali's brows were also tightly furrowed as she mused. "A natural disaster? And you can't sense the direction?" Youngming shook his head in response. "Not at the moment. However, this is a stronger feeling than I've ever gotten before. If a disaster really is going to strike, it's going to be one of unprecedented proportions." Yali drew a sharp breath upon hearing this. Youngming's words were sufficient testament to just how catastrophic this disaster would be if it were to take place. She asked in a grim voice, "What should we do?" Youngming replied, "We can only report this to the Federation. After what happened last time, they should take things more seriously on this occasion. Also, send out a Shrek order and inform all of the graduated inner court disciples of this feeling of mine. Tell them to be on their guard, and if they encounter any signs of danger, they can request for assistance from the academy." "All right. Should I organize a Sea Gods Pavilion meeting?" Yali asked. Youngming shook his head. "Not yet. After all, I'm unable to confirm the nature of this feeling yet. After reaching this level in my cultivation, my own power is being severely oppressed by the heavens, so I can't entirely eliminate the possibility that this feeling could be false. Even so, it can't hurt to be more careful. Due to the fact that the existence of the divine realm could no longer be felt in this world, Youngming would often suffer bouts of disorientation after becoming a limit Douluo. During these lapses, he would feel as if he could sense something, but also nothing at all. The closer one got to his level, the more they wanted to find out where the divine realm is, and whether it still even exists. As such, his cultivation revolved entirely around interacting with the heavenly Dou, so he couldn't eliminate the possibility that his senses were being disrupted by the heavenly Dou. However, what was for sure was that feeling was continuing to linger in his heart. Tang Wolin awakened his meditation, feeling completely reinvigorated and refreshed. Ever since his martial soul had undergone a second awakening and he'd formed his two major power vortexes, his rate of cultivation had spiked drastically, to the extent that he could noticeably sense himself improving every day. This improvement was not just limited to his soul power, but also everything else, such as his purple demon eyes. After his bloodline power vortex had taken shape, the rate at which he could cultivate his purple demon eyes increased by threefold, and as a result, even his spiritual power was increasing at a far faster speed. Chapter 873. It was extremely rare for someone of his age to possess Spirit of this realm's spiritual power, and it was even rarer for someone of his cultivation rank to be able to maintain such a high speed of cultivation. He got off his bed, and he was just about to go and practice his forging for a while when a scorching sensation suddenly appeared on his wrist. He reflexively looked down to find that the teardrop-shaped 9-colored gem on his bracelet that he obtained from the Dragon Valley was shimmering with a faint light. The scorching sensation was coming from none other than that gem as well. Ever since he'd obtained this bracelet, it hadn't really changed at all, and this was the first time it had displayed such a reaction. But what did this mean? Why was it suddenly heating up? Could it have been stimulated by his bloodline? Tang Wolin flipped his wrist over with a confused look on his face, but the scorching sensation only grew more pronounced. At the same time, a sense of unease also began to well up in his heart. This was very strange. Tang Wolin had never figured out what purpose this bracelet served. All he knew was that this was a parting gift from all of the true dragon skeletons in the Dragon Valley. At this moment, the scorching sensation emanating from it and the unease in his heart left him rather befuddled. Could it be that this gem was trying to warn him about something? But what could it be warning him about? If he was still on the demonic island or outside of the academy, then he would immediately be feeling very cautious. However, he was currently situated in Shrek Academy. Was there a safer place in this world than Shrek Academy? In particular, this was the Sea God's Island, the core region of Shrek Academy. There were most likely more than 10 hyper Douluos here, as well as Atlas Douluo Youngming. What could this bracelet possibly be warning him about? It had to be a false alarm. As a safety precaution, Tang Wolin hurriedly inspected his own internal condition and observed his own bloodline vortex, just in case it was his own bloodline power that was triggering this reaction from the bracelet. However, his bloodline vortex was functioning in a normal manner, and his own blood essence was as powerful as ever, but it definitely wouldn't affect the rotation of his bloodline vortex. aspects. He was in as good a condition as he possibly could be, and if he were to continue cultivating at this rate, he would definitely continue to rapidly grow stronger. During these past few days, he'd already begun experimenting with creating alloys consisting of 4 different types of metals, and the results have been very encouraging. Now that he was capable of soul refinement, forging such alloys was no issue to him at all. He was even beginning to experiment with fusing 5 types of metals to form alloys, and if he could succeed there, everyone's battle armor would definitely receive significant boosts. Even if they were only suits of 2-word battle armor, they definitely wouldn't be inferior to average suits of 3-word battle armor. Right at this moment, the bracelet on his wrist slowly began to cool, and everything seemed to have returned to normal. Tang Wuolin heaved a faint sigh of relief and shrugged to himself. Who knew what had just happened? He was most likely just being oversensitive. After all, this was Shrek Academy. What could possibly happen here? With that in mind, he emerged from the wooden cabin and made his way toward his forging room. After consolidating his skills as a Saint blacksmith, he was going to begin refining metals for everyone. The designs had already been completed well in advance, and after he refined the alloys required, using Glin and Yuan, he would be able to begin making everyone's suits of battle armor. With their cultivation ranks, this would definitely be quite a fast construction process. After all, they had their suits of 1-word battle armor acting as foundations, so it would be a lot faster to craft their suits of 2-word battle armor than if they had to make them from scratch. What is it, mistress? A woman in black asked in a faint voice. She was situated at the summit of a tall mountain that extended all the way into the clouds, and vast expanses of clouds could be seen in all directions. The winds on the mountain summit were quite strong, blowing moisture through the air, but no condensation gathered around them. Yuna stood at the edge of her cliff, and her long white dress along with her flowing silver hair gave her the appearance of a celestial maiden. There was a disoriented look in her eyes, and she shook her head as she said, "For some reason, I'm feeling a sense of uneasiness. My heart rate has increased by 5 beats per minute compared to its normal resting rate." What? The woman in black had a stunned look on her face as she exclaimed, "What could that mean?" Yuna shook her head in response. "I don't know, either. How are you going with the things I asked you to prepare?" The woman in black replied, "We've already completed 60%, so we've set up a foundation. DTN says that there are no problems on his end, and once all preparations are complete, everything will be ready for you, my lord. After that, all we have to do is wait." Yuna nodded in response. After a brief pause, the woman in black asked in a hesitating manner, "My lord, those people have contacted us again. As the saying goes, the enemy of an enemy is a friend. Are we really not going to cooperate with them?" Yuna abruptly turned around and waved her right hand through the air. A terrifying aura erupted from her body, causing the entire mountain summit to tremor slightly. All of the clouds and mist in the surrounding area were shattered, and they fell as rain onto the ground below. The woman in black was sent flying while Yuna's cold voice reverberated around the mountain summit. "How many times do I need to say this? We're never going to work with those putrid beings. Mention them to me one more time and I'll have you skinned." The woman in black disappeared and didn't return to the mountain summit. Yuna wore a grave expression on her face and remained silent for a long while. A figure gradually began to appear in her mind. "It's been so long. Is he still doing fine? Why am I feeling so uneasy?" The only thing that could evoke these feelings within me is him. This was a quiet yet extremely spacious room with a domed ceiling. Large patches of demonic symbols covered the entire room from the ceiling to the floor. The room was around 30 meters tall with a diameter of over 50 meters. At the very center of the room, there were a total of 12 people sitting in a circle with their legs crossed, and all of them were murmuring something. There were soul rings around every one of these people, and if anyone else were present at the scene, they'd be stunned to discover that each of them had 8 soul rings. 8 ring soul Douluos were already considered to be very powerful, even in the world of soul masters, yet 12 of them were gathered in this one place to do one thing. The demonic symbols on the ground that they were sitting on were even more complex, and what was quite unsettling was that there were puddles of blood flowing around the demonic symbols. The demonic symbols had all been carved into the ground, and the blood was constantly changing as they flowed through those complex patterns. There were over 100 people standing around the outskirts of the room, and all of them were wearing completely black clothes with black balaclavas on their heads. Only their left hands were revealed, and the blood was flowing from none other than their slit left wrists. The faint scent of blood permeated throughout the entire room, creating an extremely horrifying atmosphere, but this pungent odor didn't escape out of the room at all. What was going on? What had happened? Why was this happening? At the center of the circle formed by the 12 soul Douluos was a blackish purple hexagram. The hexagram was emitting an extremely strong odor of blood and gore, and something stood at the very center of the hexagram. This was a glowing blackish purple object that was around 3 meters tall, and there were countless demonic symbols carved all over its surface. Its tip was of a cylindrical shape. What appeared to be a series of metallic wings ran down its shaft. All of the enormous energy in the surrounding area was surging toward this object, which was like an insatiable black hole that was relentlessly absorbing all of the blood and energy. Chapter 874. Not only that, but in the neighboring room, there was an identical setup, except the object at the center of that room was entirely dark green in color, and the demonic symbols were even more complex. Regardless of whether it was the men in black in the outer circle or the 12 soul Douluos at the center of the room, all of their bodies were slowly withering away due to energy loss. However, not a single sound could be heard within the 2 rooms. At the Tang sect, after completing a series of official duties, a contemplative look appeared in Go Xiaoshu's eyes. Right at this moment, a boisterous voice rang out. "What's on your mind, Xiaoshu? You seem quite distracted. Care for a drink?" The master of the power hall, Zhao Song, walked in from outside, rubbing his own bald head with a smile on his face. He shared an extremely close friendship with Go Xiaoshu. They were both of a similar age and had once cultivated together for many years in the past. It was only later on in their cultivation journeys that they diverged toward different paths. They both joined the Tang sect at the same time and went on to become high-ranking members of the sect. Go Xiaoshu was in a higher position of power than Zhao Song in the Tang sect, but that didn't drive any wedges into their friendship. Go Xiaoshu replied, "I can't. There are too many things for me to take care of in the sect. Both of the palace masters are absent, and the priests from the holy hall completely detached themselves from these official duties, so I have to take up the mantle." Zhao Song asked, "Does Heaven Dou City still require attention on our end? I thought that the aftermath had already been dealt with." Go Xiaoshu sighed. The Holy Spirit cult has been in hiding for so many years, yet they've chosen to return now, and they're acting in an extremely discreet manner. The work that needs to be done over at Heaven Dou City is nearing a conclusion, but we still have no idea where the main forces of the Holy Spirit cult are. Even back when the Vice Palace Master was here, he still couldn't find anything important and only managed to capture a few small fry. According to the analysis from the Palace Master, the Holy Spirit cult's attack on Heaven Dou City is only a precursor, and an attack of a larger scale is most likely yet to come. We don't know if or where that attack will happen, so we have to constantly be on our guard. Zhao Song's brows furrowed slightly. "You're right. Those abhorrent bastards. Don't let me run into them. Otherwise, I'm twisting their heads off and using them as chamber pots." Go Xiaoshu chuckled. "Your temper's just as fiery as ever. Your outer holes must also be quite busy recently. You know what? I think I'll go have a drink with you after all. It's important to relax from time to time. Where's Liang Xiaoyu? Call him up as well." "Sure." Night fell, and the Tang sect gradually became more peaceful. Tang Wuolin completed his forging practice and emerged from his forging room. His surroundings were pitch black, and he looked up into the sky to discover that even though the winds were quite strong, there was not a single star to be seen. This struck him with a strong sense of foreboding and oppression. Right at this moment, the 9-colored gem on his wrist began to heat up again, and it became a lot hotter than it did before, to the extent that Tang Wuolin almost reflexively held it away. "What's going on?" Tang Wuolin hurriedly looked down at the bracelet, and even in the pitch black night, he could see that the gem had turned into a sinister crimson color. An overwhelming sense of fear also began to well up in his heart. This has to be a warning sign. Something's definitely going to happen. He could still ignore the signs being displayed by the bracelet during the day, but this feeling was far too strong for him to ignore. He immediately sprang forward, charging directly toward the Sea God's Island, and at the same time, he quickly dialed the number for Shishi Soul Communicator. "What are you doing, Shishi?" Tang Wuolin asked in an urgent manner. "I was just preparing to meditate. What's up, boss? If it's not something too important, can we talk about it tomorrow?" Yuanan agreed to let me meditate with her today. Hee. Tang Wuolin hurriedly continued. "Forget meditation. Call up Yuanan, then contact everyone else and tell them to come to the Sea God's Island right away. I have a really bad feeling that something's about to happen." "Huh? Are you sure, boss? It's already this late. Should I really call everyone at this hour?" Tang Wuolin immediately flared up with rage. "Just do as I say." I don't know what's going to happen, but this is a really bad feeling. Hurry up and get everyone to come to the Sea God's Island. It was undoubtedly the case that the Sea God's Island was the safest place. She had an extremely high level of trust toward Tang Wuling, so he immediately said, "All right, we'll see you on the Sea God's Island." After cutting off the call, Tang Wuling had already arrived at the shore of the Sea God's Lake. He charged over the water and quickly sped toward the Sea God's Island. Right at this moment, light suddenly flashed in the inky black night sky. Tang Wuling was rushing toward the Sea God's Island, and he couldn't help but turn toward that flash of light. Thus, he was greeted by a peculiar sight. There were balls of light with dazzling trails of flames behind them descending from above. The light was becoming stronger and stronger, and they were heading directly toward Shrek Academy. Were those soul missiles? This was an enemy attack. Shrek City was the largest city on the entire continent, and Shrek Academy was only an academy, but it had its own army in the city. The army only consisted of 30,000 people, as that was the maximum quota that the Federation allowed, but all of them were elite soldiers, and there were 5,000 mecha pilots among their ranks. Furthermore, Shrek Academy had so many hyper Douluos and titled Douluos, and during its 20,000-year history, it had been given the title of Infallible Shrek. Who would have thought that someone would dare to attack Shrek City? From the looks of the missiles, which were falling like a meteor shower, there appeared to be over 100 of them. Soul missiles had an extremely long effective range, but Shrek City's missile defense system certainly wasn't just a useless ornament. If those missiles had come from outside the city, then they would have been destroyed long before they actually entered the city. However, these missiles had appeared right above Shrek City, and from the looks of their wide distribution, they were targeting all areas of the entire inner city. Tang Wuling fell into a completely stunned stupor at the sight of these missiles. What was happening? His premonition had been correct. There really was an attack being launched against Shrek City. This was unbelievable. It was also at this moment that a series of streaks of light instantly rose up into the air from the Sea God's Island. Initially, there were only 7 of them, but several dozens more quickly followed. These were all the most powerful beings in Shrek Academy's inner court. The first 7 streaks of light were the most dazzling, and each of them was radiating an enormous aura. As they rose up into the air, the other streaks of light instantly followed suit before dispersing and flying toward each of the soul missiles. Right after Tang Wuling arrived on the Sea God's Island, the first explosion rang out in the sky. A resounding boom erupted, and a missile exploded like a giant firework, illuminating the entire Sea God's Island as if night had suddenly transitioned into day. What terrifying explosive force! That is to be at least a 7th-grade soul missile. Tang Wuling looked on in a completely flabbergasted manner, but he was unable to do anything to help. He hadn't attained a suit of 2-word battle armor yet, so he still didn't have the ability to fly. He could only look on as his teachers and the senior disciples rose up into the air to combat the missiles. Boom, boom, boom. One explosion rang out after another, creating a spectacular fireworks display on a massive scale. Soul missiles had already been widely renowned as the most fearsome weapons since 10,000 years ago, and soul missiles that were above the 7th grade were considered to be weapons that could turn the tides of major wars. At this moment, all of the missiles exploding in the sky were at least of the 7th grade. Chapter 875. The titled Douluos of the Academy were able to hold their own against these missiles, but the inner core disciples were quickly forced back onto the ground by the terrifying explosions of energy. Fearsome explosions erupted one after another, but the figures that had risen up into the air managed to keep all of the soul missiles at bay, detonating them before they could land on the inner city. More and more figures began to rise up into the air from both the inner city and the outer city. There were countless powerful beings in Shrek City, both from Shrek Academy and the Tang sect. All of them began detonating soul missiles one by one, and a sea of fireworks encompassed the entire sky above Shrek City. Right at this moment, a series of figures rushed toward the Sea God's Island from a distance. They were none other than the other members of Shrek's 7 monsters. Tang Wuling only returned to his senses after catching sight of them, and he hurriedly released his bloodline aura to guide them toward him. My god, what's going on? This is... Shishi's jaw had already dropped to the ground. He had initially been rather displeased with Tang Wuling as a rare opportunity to get intimate with Yuan and had been foiled by him, but he certainly wasn't going to complain now. Everyone wore grim expressions on their faces. All of them knew that such an attack against Shrek Academy was completely unprecedented. The energy fluctuations in the air descended from above, and even though they were standing on the Sea God's Island, they could still sense the terrifying pressure radiating toward them. If those devastating shockwaves were to land on the ground below, the entire city would most likely be razed to the ground. Right at this moment, a series of bright halos lit up, forming protective barriers. In the beginning, these barriers only appeared over the inner city, but they quickly began to appear in the outer city as well. The barriers rippled violently in the face of the powerful shockwaves, but they managed to keep the threat at bay. Tang Wuling didn't say anything to his friends, and all of them wore extremely grave expressions. None of them were powerful enough to participate in this battle, but the question in their mind was, how had Shrek Academy become a battlefield? During the day, Tang Wuling had thought about how Shrek Academy was the safest place in this world, yet a few hours after that, it was being assaulted by such a terrifying attack. Over 100 soul missiles that were above the 7th grade had been launched at them, that would definitely have cost an astronomical price. Could it be that the Federation was attacking Shrek City, or could it be coming from the Holy Spirit cult? There was no way for the former to be true. After all, there were so many high-ranking federal officials who were alumni of Shrek Academy, and besides, Shrek Academy had always maintained a neutral stance. They had never influenced the Federation's decisions, so there was no reason for the Federation to attack them. However, if the latter were true, then that would be an extremely terrifying prospect. How had an evil soul master sect, a terrorist organization, gotten their hands on so many powerful soul missiles? What did this entail? Even the most patriotic of individuals had to believe that the Federation was connected to the Holy Spirit cult. They couldn't allow those soul missiles to strike the city. Otherwise, Shrek City would become the second Heaven Dou City. Tang Wuling's heart abruptly constricted at the thought of Heaven Dou City. This was because he recalled Goshiashu telling him that most of the damage dealt to Heaven Dou City had been caused by a 9th grade soul missile. 9th grade soul missiles were weapons that were too powerful for even a major city's protective barriers to keep at bay. Soul missiles that were above the 9th grade were weapons that even hyper Douluos wouldn't dare to face head on. With that in mind, Tang Wuling's throat immediately ran dry. If those evil soul masters had prepared 9th grade soul missiles on this occasion as well, then the worst was still yet to come. At the Sea God's Pavilion, the Sea God's Pavilion master, Atlas Douluo Yanning stood at the top of the pavilion. Holy Spirit Douluo Yali stood beside him, and on his other side was Light Dark Douluo Longyeyu. All 3 of them were casting their eyes into the sky, and Yanning finally understood why he'd been experiencing such a strong feeling of directionless unease. It turned out that the imminent tragedy that he sensed was going to befall Shrek City rather than anywhere else. Just as Tang Wuling had thought that no one would dare to attack Shrek City, he had also been drawn to the same complacent opinion, and he wore a thunderous expression on his face. Yali gripped tightly onto Yanning's hand. She couldn't even remember the last time that she had been this nervous. All of them knew that the Holy Spirit cult had to have more up their sleeves for them to dare to attack Shrek City. Times really have changed. Light Dark Douluo Longyeyu chuckled coldly. It seems that our Shrek City hasn't bared our fangs to the world for too long. Even trash like these evil soul masters dare to attack us now. Young Ming, has our Shrek City's influence in the Federation grown so weak already? How did all of these soul missiles get here? They were launched from inside the city. When did our Shrek City's defenses become so feeble? In the face of Longyeyu's accusations, Young Ming had no response. Indeed, Shrek City had experienced peace for too long. Everyone had become convinced that the infallible Shrek was truly infallible. Who could have imagined that someone would dare to attack Shrek City? Young Ming was well aware of what it meant for the city to be attacked by so many soul missiles from such close range, and his hands balled up into tight fists. However, he knew that he had to remain calm and control the entire situation. The enemy's attacks definitely wouldn't be limited to just this. Right at this moment, the ground began to tremor slightly, and Young Ming and Longyeyu's expressions both changed in unison. A series of dull explosions rang out in the distance, and on this occasion, they were taking place on the ground rather than in the air. From a bird's eye perspective, one would discover that a series of mushroom clouds were rising up in the outer city. A series of terrifying explosions erupted alongside the blood-curdling cries of countless residents. It had finally begun. The enemies were able to launch soul missiles from within the city, so they could naturally detonate these missiles without even launching them. Shrek City was the largest city on the entire continent, and it also had the largest population. Virtually all of the residents of the city were proud of their residency status, but at this moment, an unprecedented disaster had befallen them. Yan Ming's face had turned completely pale. The entire army within the Shrek City had already been mobilized. When the attack had first begun, he'd already issued an order to seal off all the streets and place the entire outer city into lockdown, not permitting anyone to enter or leave it. However, that order had only been issued a few minutes ago, and it was now being met by a series of violent explosions. heavens. The explosions in the air were dazzling fireworks, but the explosions on the ground were catastrophes. Over 15 explosions had rung out already, and countless innocent residents had undoubtedly perished. This was most definitely a war that had been planned well in advance. That's right, it was a war, not just a terrorist attack. This was a disaster that had struck without any premonition. Every city had all types of advanced sensory devices that could detect explosives, and if things like soul missiles were to be discovered, they had to be immediately taken care of by the city's officials. However, so many high-grade soul missiles had appeared in Shrek City, the so-called infallible Shrek. What did that entail? It entailed that the enemy had ways to breach Shrek City's defenses, and that Shrek City was no longer infallible. Yan Ming suddenly understood everything now. The terrorist attack launched against Heaven Dou City had drawn everyone's attention, and both the Tang sect, as well as Shrek Academy, had deployed many powerful beings to the city. However, the ultimate target of the enemy was never Heaven Dou City. After all, Heaven Dou City didn't pose much of a threat to the Holy Spirit cult, but Shrek Academy and the Tang sect were an entirely different story. This had been the enemy's ultimate target all along. I'll go, Yali yelled before attempting to rush out, only to be held back by Yan Ming. This definitely wasn't the extent of the enemy's attacks. Both Shrek Academy and the Tang sect headquarters were situated in the inner city. The outer city was being severely ravaged by these attacks, but this still wasn't enough to truly harm Shrek City's foundation. As such, this was definitely not the end. If all of them were to panic and make rash decisions now, they'd only be falling into the enemy's trap, and even more severe disasters will follow. Comrades of the Tang sect, please save our injured citizens. I leave the outer city to you. Yan Ming's voice traveled far into the distance. Light suddenly flashed, and light dark Douluo along Yeyu rose up into the air. She was unable to keep watching any longer. Chapter 876. Yan Ming raised her hand but decided against stopping her in the end. It wasn't like he could stop her anyway. He took a deep breath and calmly held onto Yeli's hand. I've already failed Shrek City, but now, I must do all I can to protect it. Tang Wulin and the others had all turned deathly pale as they stood on the Sea God's Island. They could also hear the explosions taking place in the outer city and see the mushroom clouds rising up into the air in the distance. Their minds had gone completely blank. This was something completely unimaginable to them. They didn't even know where their enemy was, yet they were already afflicted by such a terrifying disaster. The energy storm in the air still hadn't dissipated, and those mushroom clouds were undoubtedly taking countless lives. Right at this moment, a voice that was filled with authority rang out beside their ears. Come to the Sea God's Pavilion. Tang Wulin shuddered and immediately returned to his senses. He waved a hand toward his friends, and all of them quickly rushed toward the Sea God's Pavilion. The Sea God's Island wasn't very large, so they quickly arrived at the Sea God's Pavilion, where they were met by Atlas Douluo Yan Ming and Holy Spirit Douluo Yali. Yan Ming appeared to be very calm, as if nothing were happening at all. Following the arrival of Tang Wuling and the others, he stepped forward and commanded, from now on, no matter what happens, stay in the Sea God's Pavilion. Go. Tang Wuling faltered slightly upon hearing this. Pavilion Master, please allow us to help the academy in some way. Shut up and get inside. Yan Ming roared. He waved a hand through the air, and a terrifying burst of energy swept up the 7 of them before dumping them into the Sea God's Pavilion. Remember that all of you represent the future of the academy. If the worst-case scenario happens today, you will be the foundation upon which the academy is rebuilt. Yan Ming's voice reverberated within everyone's ears. Tang Wuling's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. Was the situation that bad already? Right at this moment, Tang Wuling suddenly discovered that everything outside had turned purple without any premonition. The entire sky had turned purple, and the ground had also been stained the same purple color. A burst of dazzling golden light suddenly erupted from the golden tree as well, encompassing the entire inner court within. The golden tree house that was the Shrek Academy lit up. Immediately thereafter, conjuring up an extremely rich burst of life force energy that revolved around them while also barring them from exiting the Sea God's Pavilion. Tang Wuling could clearly see that when the terrifying purple color appeared, the figures that had risen up from Shrek Academy earlier all disappeared without a trace, as if their very existence had been erased from the face of this world. Atlas Douluo Yan Ming shuddered, and in the next instant, he rose up into the air with Yeli's hand in his. The purple color in the sky was becoming more pronounced, and even the golden light being released by the golden treehouse was gradually beginning to disintegrate. A burst of fearlessly dazzling light erupted from Yan Ming's body, attempting to spear through the purple color, but even his immense powers proved to be too little. Right at this moment, a massive purple skull appeared in midair. The skull had a diameter in excess of a kilometer, and it opened its mouth to blast forth a burst of flames. At the top of the skull sat 9 people, all of whom wore black robes with green embroidered edges. Each and every one of them had 9 soul rings around their bodies, and the one sitting at the very center of the group had an astonishing soul ring configuration consisting of 4 blacks, an orange, and 4 reds. Yan Ming, you didn't think that Shrek City would also fall someday, did you? From this day forth, Shrek City and the Tang sect will both be wiped out of existence. The purple flames erupting from the giant purple skull's mouth flashed with Yan Ming's sphere intent, and dazzling light instantly erupted from his atlas sphere. The light being released by the golden tree converged and fell upon him, making his entire body take on a shimmering golden hue. A heavy yet regal suit of 4-word battle armor appeared over his body, and in that instant, he resembled an invincible war god. However, due to the fact that all of the energy from the golden tree was being focused on him, Tang Wuling and the others could clearly see that everything on the Sea God's Island around the golden tree was rapidly disintegrating in the face of that terrifying purple color. You've used a 12-grade soul missile. You'll face opprobrium from the entire world for this. Yan Ming's enraged roar echoed through the air while terrifying energy fluctuations continued to surge over the entire Shrek Academy. Tang Wuling was completely rooted to the spot, as were all of his friends. She didn't even dare to imagine what would have happened had he decided against listening to Tang Wuling's instructions. In the distance, another burst of light appeared. That burst of light was green in color, and the epicenter of that explosion was right at the Tang sect headquarters. The entirety of Shrek City had already been reduced to a world of death. From up above, one would only be able to see 2 vast vortexes, one green and one purple, expanding relentlessly while engulfing everything in their wake. The entire Shrek City was quickly disappearing off the face of this world. None of the protective barriers served any purpose in the face of the green and purple colors. Countless lives were being lost by the second in the face of this terrifying energy storm. The golden tree house shuddered violently, and Tang Wuling felt as if the entire world in his eyes were becoming illusionary. After forming his 2 energy vortexes, Tang Wuling had thought that he would be able to establish himself in the world of soul masters. However, in this moment, in the face of this disaster that was befalling them like divine retribution, he felt like an insignificant little ant. If they were outside the golden tree house at this point in time, then they would have definitely perished in the face of that deathly energy. It was over for Shrek Academy. Who would have thought that the #1 academy on the continent, the infallible Shrek, would be reduced to such a tragic state someday? The golden tree house continued to tremor violently, and the golden light around it was being relentlessly stripped away by the terrifying purple light. Tang Wuling suddenly recalled Yan Ming scolding him about how the formation of his 5th soul ring had absorbed too much of the golden tree's energy. Perhaps if he hadn't taken so much energy from the golden tree, it would have been able to withstand this attack. It was over. Everything was over. The golden light around the golden tree house finally completely shattered, and the terrifying deathly energy was beginning to lay waste to the golden tree. Tang Wuling bit down on his lower lip in a stubborn manner as he spread open his arms. He positioned himself in front of his friends and unleashed his violent golden dragon domain. He knew that in the face of this terrifying disaster, he couldn't do anything, nor could he protect anyone. Atlas, Sunstrike. Right at this moment, an explosive roar erupted from outside. The voice pierced directly into everyone's minds, and Tang Wuling and his friends instantly felt the terrifying pressure weighing down upon them less significantly. The disintegration of the golden tree suddenly ceased, and in that moment, time seemed to have come to a complete standstill. In the air above, Atlas Douluo Yan Ming's expression remained as calm as ever, but there was boundless sorrow in his eyes. He was the current Sea God's Pavilion Master, yet he could only look on as Shrek Academy was destroyed before his very eyes. Over 20,000 years of heritage had been razed to the ground in the blink of an eye. One could only imagine the pain and grief surging through his heart. No one could have possibly anticipated an attack from 12th grade soul missiles. In this entire world, there were only 3 such missiles that had been created, and they were also the only 3 to have been successfully created in human history. In order to make them a reality, the Federation had poured forth countless time, resources, and effort. However, at the time, the the Federation announced that no more of these weapons would be created, and with the resources on the Douluo continent, there wasn't enough left to create a fourth one anyway. Chapter 877. These 3 12th grade soul missiles had been created over 2,000 years ago, and following their creation, the advancement of human technology stalled for 1,000 years as they'd simply expended far too many resources to create. The 3 12th grade soul missiles were being kept in the most secure federal facilities, and they were only to be used as the ultimate weapons of the entire Douluo continent. They also had a nickname, God Slayers. This meant that these 3 soul missiles were thought of as weapons capable of killing gods, and that alone was sufficient testament to their power. No one had tested them before, and below the 12th grade, there didn't even exist any 11th grade soul missiles. They were weapons that were held in the highest regard by the Federation, and if they really were to be used someday, a unanimous vote of approval had to be given by the entire federal parliament. Even if there were only a single vote against their usage, they could not be used. Who would have thought that these ungodly weapons of destruction, the ultimate weapons of the entire continent, would be used on Shrek Academy and the Tang sect? 2 12th grade soul missiles were more than powerful enough to raise the entire Shrek city to the ground. All of the titled Douluos and inner-court disciples that were in the air not long ago had all been erased from existence by the terrifying explosions. The Shrek Academy had stood at the pinnacle of the entire continent a moment ago, yet now, it completely ceased to exist. This was the horror of technology, and it represented the pinnacle of the destructive power of human technology. Yan Ming raised his Atlas spear high into the air, and the life force energy stemming from the golden tree was emanating dazzling light. The 12th grade soul missile that had struck Shrek Academy was known as Godslayer, Destroyer of Heaven and Earth, while the one that had fallen on the Tang sect headquarters was known as Godslayer, Devourer of Heaven and Earth. From Yan Ming's current perspective, he could see that the entire Shrek city was disintegrating. A heartbroken smile appeared on his face, and his suit of 4-word battle armor suddenly burst into violent flames. Even with his power as a limit Douluo, there was no way that he'd be able to contend with the powers of these 12th grade soul missiles, but if he were to try and escape, no one would be able to stop him. However, could he really run away from all of this? He couldn't. Shrek Academy had been destroyed, and as the current Sea God's Pavilion Master, he couldn't abandon his post. He could see the cold mockery in the eyes of all of the evil soul masters on the giant skeleton in the distance, and he could feel one life being lost after another within Shrek City. However, no matter how remorseful he was, there was no way to reverse this situation. How had all of this happened? How had these 12th grade soul missiles fallen into the hands of these evil soul masters? Why was it that Shrek City's defenses had become so feeble after so many years of peace? If these 2 soul missiles had been launched from outside the city, they wouldn't have caused such a catastrophic disaster. Countless thoughts flashed through Yan Ming's mind in an instant, but there was only one thing that he could do now. Atlas, Sunstrike. Piercing golden light erupted from his entire body, and streaks of golden light began to appear behind him. These golden lines intertwined to form a massive rune, and as soon as that rune appeared, time completely stopped. Everything around him came to an instant standstill. Even the 9 evil soul masters on the giant skull in the distance were stunned by what they were witnessing. Their waved his right hand, and the massive skull abruptly retreated back to over 50 kilometers away in an instant. A dark expression appeared on his face as he spat through gritted teeth. That's a godseat. The golden rune quickly took shape, and a cry of desperation and sorrow suddenly rang out from below Yan Ming. Don't do it, brother Ming. Yan Ming slowly lowered his head and looked down at the beautiful woman below him with boundless affection in his eyes. I'm too ashamed to go and meet the forefathers of our Shrek Academy. Farewell, Yali. Look after yourself and preserve the final seed of our Shrek Academy. After his voice trailed off, his Atlas spear abruptly shuddered, and the golden rune behind him suddenly disintegrated. At the same time, a vast expanse of dazzling golden light erupted forth, instantly spreading over the entirety of Shrek City. Yan Ming had been a limit Douluo for several decades already, and during this time, he had been constantly searching for a way to break through the upper limits of human capabilities in order to ascend to that other world. He couldn't sense the existence of the divine realm, but only after reaching his level of cultivation would one understand that the divine realm truly existed. However, it was no longer a realm that could be contacted by the human world. If he wanted to become a true god, he'd have to recreate the divine realm. Among all of the past generations of the Sea God's Pavilion Masters, Yan Ming definitely possessed one of the most powerful cultivation levels. He didn't know whether he'd be able to succeed during this lifetime, but he was constantly striding toward that goal, and at the very least, he was paving the way for his successors. He firmly believed that in the not too distant future, humans would be able to recreate the divine realm. The god seat behind him was something that he had created, and he was preparing to use it to explore outer space. God seats were required for a divine realm to be created. That was something that had been recorded in many ancient historical records. He would succeed in creating a divine realm once his god seat became powerful enough to at least encompass the entirety of the Douluo continent. Unfortunately, even after several decades of painstaking effort, he was still very much a novice in this endeavor. There was no way for him to be able to truly create a divine realm during his lifetime. All he could do was leave his experiences behind for his successors to reference. In this dire situation for Shrek Academy, he released his incomplete god seat in an unreserved manner, and in that instant, he was a god. His god seat was destroyed, which heralded the death of a god, but the power it brought elevated him to heights that he'd never scaled before. The 2 12th grade soul missiles had successfully slain a god, but Yan Ming had also used the last of his power to nullify their terrifying destructive power. The purple and green colors were neutralized and forcibly drawn into the air by the golden light, where they continued to clash and intertwine. Yan Ming's body gradually turned transparent, and no matter how hard Yali tried, she was unable to rise up into the air. Yan Ming lowered his head. He didn't look up at the clashing energies in the sky as he'd already done everything he could and given everything he had to give. At this moment, there was only sorrow in his eyes. He couldn't bear to leave behind Shrek Academy and the woman that he loved. He could see Yali screaming up at him, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. He could see tears streaming down her face, and her completely heartbroken expression. He said in a gentle voice, for the sake of Shrek, live on. After that, he abruptly spread open his arms, and his Atlas spear fell out of his right hand before landing in Yali's grasp. Through the enhancement of that final burst of godly power, his Atlas spear finally evolved from a martial soul to an actual object. After spearing open his arms, the golden light emanating from Yan Ming's body reached the peak of its brightness, and it was as if a scintillating golden sun had appeared in the air. In the next instant, he was already flying toward the giant skull in the distance. This was the final radiance of the light of Atlas. The 9 evil soul masters on the massive skull were all horrified to see this, and they sped away as quickly as they could atop the giant skull. At this point, Yan Ming was already no longer a limit Douluo. Instead, he was a fallen god, and the final radiance of this fallen god was definitely not something they wanted to face. However, there was no way that they'd be able to outrun a godly being. The giant skull was quickly inundated by golden light, and the entire sky turned into a scorching white color. The night seemed to have transitioned into day, and the powers of the 2 12th grade soul missiles were also finally completely nullified by the final trace of godly light. The entire world seemed to have been encompassed under this white light, and all of the life forms below it could only sprawl down onto the ground in the face of its fearsome radiance. The white light lingered in the air for a long time as if it were representing Yan Ming's reluctance to part with this world. Tang Wu lay sprawled on the ground like everyone else. He was trying everything he could to struggle to his feet, all to no avail. He had heard everything that Yan Ming had said before his passing, but his brain was still completely blank. Everything had happened far too abruptly. The almighty Shrek Academy had been wiped off the face of the world in what seemed like the blink of an eye. In a battle between a god and godslayers, they were so pitiful and insignificant. They could only face the aftermath of this epic battle, yet they were far too weak to do anything during the battle. Without the protection of the golden tree, they would have been reduced to dust long ago. After what seemed like an eternity, the white light finally began to fade. Everything seemed to have disappeared, and deathly silence ensued. When Tang Wu raised his head again, he was met by the sight of the Sea God's Pavilion slowly crumbling into dust before being carried away in the wind. It was also at this moment that a speck of white light suddenly flew out from deep within the Sea God's Pavilion before vanishing into Tang Wu's glabella. Holy Spirit Douluo Yali was lying on the ground nearby, completely unconscious. Death and destruction stretched for as far as the eyes could see in all directions. Chapter 878. The sea god's island was gone, and the sea god's lake had run dry. Tang Wuling could see nothing but inky blackness in all directions. It was as if the entire world had been plunged into an abyss without any light. Was this Shrek Academy? Was this Shrek City? Why was it that there was only darkness in all directions as far as the eyes could see? Shrek's 7 monsters struggled to their feet, and all of them wore completely dazed and stiff expressions. They'd regained the ability to speak at this point, but none of them were able to say anything. Their beloved Shrek Academy had been wiped off the face of the entire continent. Just like that. The entire process had only spanned around a quarter of an hour, and the almighty Shrek Academy that had stood at the pinnacle of the continent for 20,000 years now ceased to exist. Not even a single trace of its students and teachers remained, and it seemed that the only ones who had survived were the 7 of them and the unconscious holy spirit Douluo Yali, Scarlet Dragon Douluo Chawoshi, Blazing Dragon Douluo Fengwuyu, Silver Moon Douluo Elderkai, Light Dark Douluo Long Yeyu and countless other powerful beings of Shrek Academy had all completely vanished during that doomsday-like disaster. They were all only around 20 years old, and even though they'd endured many trials and tribulations, this was still far too much for them to handle. The academy that they relied on and took immense pride in had suddenly vanished. They were Shrek's 7 monsters, representing the future hope of Shrek Academy, but the academy didn't even exist anymore. This wasn't a war, it was a catastrophic disaster. Shrek Academy was gone, as was the Tang Sect headquarters. Comparatively, the Tang Sect was in a slightly better situation. At the very least, they had branches in other cities, but there was only one Shrek Academy. This was the most lavish and populous city on the entire continent, a city that over 10 million people called home, yet it had been destroyed along with all of its residents. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this was the biggest disaster that had ever befallen the human race, a disaster of unprecedented proportions. Right at this moment, light flashed from above their heads again, and they reflexively looked up into the night sky. Traces of despair appeared in all of their eyes. A dazzling streak of light was hurtling toward them like a shooting star, and it was another soul missile. Prior to even reaching them, the terrifying aura emanating from the missile was already striking them with a sense of asphyxiation, and an overwhelming sense of impending doom weighed down on them. They were going to leave no one alive. The exact same thought appeared in their minds. Regardless of where these soul missiles were coming from, one thing was for certain: their enemies didn't intend to allow any of them to escape with their lives. Only by killing everyone could they eliminate the possibility of a resurgence from Shrek Academy. Could they evade or try to escape? There was no way for them to do so. In the aftermath of the terrifying explosions, they were situated in a gargantuan crater that was over 10,000 feet deep. The missile was already upon them, and it was at least an 8th grade soul missile. At their cultivation ranks, there was no way that they'd be able to escape from this dire situation. They had lost the backing and protection of the academy. All they could do was use their bodies to withstand this fearsome attack. Tang Wuling was the first one to return to his senses. He didn't hesitate even in the slightest before stepping forward and abruptly springing up into the air. His strength had already reached an insane level, and even without any physical enhancements, he was able to leap more than 30 feet into the air. At the same time, a series of massive vines began to erupt from his body. Gold Song was also released, and it rammed its body violently into the ground, propelling Tang Wuling over 500 meters into the air. He couldn't fly, so this was the only way for him to rise to such a high altitude. He spread his arms open and met the oncoming soul bomb head-on. He didn't know how much of its power he could withstand. All he hoped for was that he would be able to increase his friend's chances of survival, even if it were by just a little. In that instant, he was freed from all worries and inhibitions, and he could only cling on to the extremely unlikely hope that his friends would be able to survive. Dazzling golden light flashed, and golden dragon scales appeared all over his body. Immediately thereafter, he suddenly accelerated once again in midair. He had unleashed his golden dragon takes flight, which raised his altitude by around 50 meters, and the soul bomb was extremely close to him now. Tang Wuling could even see the violet light flashing from the complex patterns on the surface of the missile. In that moment, there was no fear in his heart. The only feeling that he was experiencing was longing. He longed to see his parents again, to see Naya, and to see the woman that lay in the deepest corner of his heart. Farewell, Gu Yue. All is well as long as you're alive and well. Please forget about me. I won't be able to fulfill my promise to you. He closed his eyes and tears streamed down his face as he spread open his arms. Nothing seemed to be important anymore. In his eyes, it was as if Gu Yue had appeared before him, and all he wanted to do was to envelop her in a tight embrace. Tang Wuling was satisfied and fulfilled. He had cast aside all of his burdens and inhibitions, and he was going to leave this world with a sense of longing in his heart. Wuling, Captain, Boss. At this moment, the other members of Shrek's 7 monsters finally realized what he was doing, but it was already too late to stop him. Their eyes were filled with despair, and Yizinglin was the only one who sprang into action. She blasted a large crater into the ground with her sword, then quickly pushed her friends into the crater before dragging the unconscious holy spirit Douluo into it as well. Tang Wuling was giving up his life so they had a slightly better chance to survive. How could she let his efforts go to waste? This was not the time to be crippled by grief. As long as they could survive, the legacy of Shrek Academy would live on. A cool and refreshing sensation suddenly permeated throughout Tang Wuling's chest. He smiled, and in that moment, he felt as if she were truly in his arms. Her body was scorching hot and emitting the familiar fragrance that he couldn't get enough of. Her breathing was rather hurried, just like it had been as she was lying in his arms that night following the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention. Gu Yue, I love you, Tang Wuling murmured, with such a realistic illusion accompanying him in his final moments. What else could he ask for? I love you, too, you idiot. A familiar voice that was filled with complex emotions sounded beside his ears. Tang Wuling's eyes abruptly sprang open with astonishment. There truly was someone in his arms, and after he opened his eyes, he was immediately greeted by the sight of a set of gorgeous facial features. Naya? Tang Wuling was completely dazed. The woman in his arms was so familiar, but she seemed to have grown up all of a sudden. No, idiot, I'm your Gu Yue. She pressed her lips gently against his, and in that instant, a vast expanse of light engulfed their bodies. The last thing that Tang Wuling saw was a pair of massive silver wings spread open on Naya's back. The wings then folded around the two of them to form a protective barrier while a terrifying explosion erupted. However, aside from some slight tremors, Tang Wuling could only feel a warm, familiar embrace. Within the crater, everyone looked up, and were greeted by the sight of a vast expanse of silver light that formed a barrier in midair. Amid the violent explosion, they could see a silver figure appear out of thin air before embracing Tang Wuling and shielding him from the force of the explosion with her back. The massive explosion lasted for several dozens of seconds before it subsided. The entire ground sank down a further 3 feet while destructive energy storms wreaked havoc in all directions. Chapter 879. Tang Wuling's 6 friends were already half buried under mud from the force of the explosion, but most of the explosive force failed to make it to the ground down below. During the final moments of the explosion, only Yizinglin caught sight of a ball of silver light hurtling away into the distance through her peripheral vision. It was over. Everything truly seemed to have come to an end this time. The terrifying explosion had finally subsided. Yizinglin brushed off the soil on her body and jumped out of the crater first before helping all of her friends out of it as well. Wah! Xu Shaoan was unable to repress her grief any longer, and she burst into loud sobs. Yue's Heng Yu hurriedly enveloped her in his embrace. Yizinglin wore a grim expression on her face as she said, "Now's not the time to cry, and nor do we have any right to cry. The Pavilion Master gave his life so we could survive, and Wuling shielded us from that soul missile, so we have to live on. We are the final seeds of Shrek Academy. We are Shrek's 7 monsters, and we have to shoulder the duty of avenging Shrek Academy. Come with me." She turned and rushed toward the edge of the colossal crater that they were situated in as she spoke. Yuan and Yui picked up Yali in her arms and quickly followed along. Shi was gritting his teeth as he ran alongside her, and Shu Lizzie wore a slightly twisted expression on his face as his lips were pursed into a thin line. Xu Shaoan wiped away her tears and also followed along behind everyone with Yue's Heng Yu in accompaniment. They had no time to be struck down by grief. In the aftermath of this disaster, their top priority was to survive for themselves, for Shrek Academy, and for the Tang Sect. Yizinglin looked as calm as ever, but how could she not be in pain? However, Tang Wuling had disappeared, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. If he had truly died to save them, then she definitely couldn't let his sacrifice go to waste. She had to leave here with her friends and live on. Where there was life, there was hope. Following the demonic island military training, their mental fortitude had become a lot stronger than that of normal people. Thus, they didn't completely fall apart in the aftermath of this disaster. As long as they were still alive, the legacy of Shrek Academy would live on, and there was a chance that the Academy would be resurrected in the future. Smash! A crystal glass fell to the ground and shattered into countless pieces. The president's face had turned deathly pale. Shrek Academy has been completely destroyed by 2 Godslayer missiles. His body was trembling uncontrollably. As a man of his power and status, he was supposed to remain calm at all times, but how could he keep calm at a time like this? He was well aware of what it entailed for Shrek Academy to be destroyed. He had always wished to be able to control Shrek City one day, but never had he hoped for the destruction of the #1 academy on the continent that had stood for over 20,000 years. Shrek Academy was a neutral entity, but it was undoubtedly one of the most powerful guardians of the continent, and it was truly a force to be reckoned with. On top of that, Shrek Academy had connections all over the entire continent. The Godslayer missiles were devastating weapons under the control of the Federation. Now that Shrek Academy had been destroyed by 2 such missiles, the Federation would definitely come under immense pressure. Not only did this spell the end of his political career, the entire government and the continent would most likely be plunged into complete chaos. Launch an investigation into the 3 Godslayer missiles right away. Go. The president forced himself to calm down before issuing a series of orders. However, he knew that none of this would help his cause. The destruction of Shrek City was going to turn virtually the entire continent against him. Why? Why? Tell me why. Heavenly Phoenix Douluo Leng Yaoshu's eyes were completely bloodshot. She slammed her hands down onto the desk before her amid a resounding boom. And despite the fact that the desk had been constructed from many types of resolute alloys, it was still instantly reduced to dust. A tall and broad middle-aged man stood on the other side of the desk. He had a set of handsome facial features with a pronounced nose, but a pair of rather small eyes. There was a powerful aura emanating from his body. His brows were tightly furrowed at the side of the distraught and furious Leng Yaoshu. Calm down, Yaoshu. Everything happened far too abruptly, and I have no idea what the situation is like, either. A thorough investigation will have to be launched before we learn what's truly happened. Do you think I'm a naive little child, Kaiangyu Dongfeng? Do you think I don't know what kind of man you are? No matter how powerful the Holy Spirit cult is, there's no way they could have gotten their hands on Godslayer missiles. There's no way they could have snuck all of those soul missiles into Shrek City unless you gave them your assistance. It was you, wasn't it? Leng Yaoshu stabbed a finger directly at Kaiangyu Dongfeng as she spoke. The man standing before her was the chairman of the Spirit Pagoda, a powerful being who ranked alongside Atlas Douluo Yanming. Kaiangyu Dongfeng's expression immediately darkened upon hearing this. Yaoshu, you're the vice chairman of our Spirit Pagoda. How could you accuse me of something like this? Have you forgotten that the founder of our Spirit Pagoda, Spirit Douluo Huo was once one of Shrek's 7 monsters? Our Spirit Pagoda has no direct conflict with Shrek Academy. Why would I plot against them? Besides, just because I'm the chairman doesn't mean I get to call all the shots. His tone became a little softer as he continued. Yaoshu, this incident has taken place far too abruptly, and even I'm still reeling in its aftermath. Who could have possibly predicted that the Holy Spirit cult would already be brazen enough to attack Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect headquarters? Do you think it benefits me in any way to see the Holy Spirit cult become more powerful? What we should be doing now is contributing as much as we can to the rebuilding effort and to track down the Holy Spirit cult. I know that Yanming's death has dealt you a heavy blow, and I'm also very sad to see him pass. However, we must remain calm in the face of this calamity. Remain calm? How do you expect me to remain calm? Leng Yaoshu's aura was fluctuating violently as she threatened. Kaiangyu Dongfeng, don't let me find out that you were behind this. Otherwise, I'll kill you even if it means giving my own life. After that, she departed from the room, leaving Kaiangyu Dongfeng standing alone with a thunderous expression on his face. He looked on as Leng Yaoshu departed, and of course, he was well aware of why she would suspect him of foul play here. He had pursued Leng Yaoshu for many years in the past, but she simply couldn't get over Yanming. Even after Yanming married Yali, she still couldn't forget him, and she refrained from getting married for her entire life. During these past years, the Spirit Pagoda and Shrek Academy had been steadily growing apart, not least due to the complex love triangle relationship between the 3 of them. Chairman. A side door was opened, and a middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance walked quickly into the room. Despite his mundane looks, there was a sharp aura about him. Give me the breakdown. Shrek Academy was completely destroyed with no survivors. Our sources have gathered that Shrek's 7 monsters were also in the academy at the time. In the end, Yanming broke his own demigod birth and temporarily obtained the power of a god to nullify the destructive power of the 2 Godslayer missiles, thereby saving around half of the population of Shrek City. However, Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect headquarters were situated at the epicenters of the explosions, and there were no survivors from them. They even launched another 9th grade soul missile towards Shrek Academy after the event to kill any remaining survivors. However, the Holy Spirit cult also suffered quite severely during this attack. In order to detonate those 2 Godslayer missiles, they sacrificed close to 20 of their soul Douluos and also hundreds of the intermediate evil soul masters. Prior to Yanming's death, he destroyed their Armageddon skull, and aside from the master of the Holy Spirit cult, who managed to get away, 8 of their title Douluos were killed. That's definitely a significant setback for them. Kaiangyu Dongfeng's eyes narrowed slightly as a pleased look appeared on his face. Very good. As expected, Yanming really hasn't disappointed me. The Holy Spirit cult has been in hiding for 10,000 years and accumulated so much power, yet they still paid such a heavy price even though they've been plotting against Shrek Academy for so long. Both sides have paid dearly during this incident. This is the best outcome for us. We should take advantage of this opportunity to make our presence felt. With the destruction of Shrek City, the entire parliament is definitely going to be forced into liquidation. We need to step in and strive to secure as many parliamentary spots as we can. Your wisdom is truly unmatched. Chairman, you've killed many birds with one stone here. The middle-aged man praised with admiration in his eyes. Kaiangyu Dongfeng turned to him with a cold expression. What do you mean I killed many birds with one stone? We didn't do anything here. I'm also extremely sad and shocked that Shrek City has fallen under such tragic circumstances. The middle-aged man immediately gave a knowing nod as he said, Indeed, we express our deepest condolences to Shrek Academy. All right, you may go now. I'm going to release an order to the entire Spirit Pagoda to hunt down all evil soul masters. You know what to do. Remember not to leave any evidence that can be used as leverage against us. And also, get someone to track Vice Chairman Leng so she doesn't do anything foolish. Yes. The middle-aged man departed, and Kaiangyu Dongfeng made his way over to the window, casting his gaze toward the white clouds outside with his eyes narrowed in contemplation. Chapter 880. It hurt so much. A sense of severe physical discomfort jolted Tang Wuling awake. He felt as if his entire body had fallen apart at the seams. With his immensely powerful physical constitution, he rarely ever experienced this kind of pain aside from when he was breaking his golden dragon king seals. Am I dead? Have I already died? As he gradually regained consciousness, he slowly began to recall everything that had happened. He really wished that it was just a nightmare that he could wake up from. It had to have been a nightmare. Shrek Academy was so powerful. How could it have been destroyed? He opened his eyes with difficulty, and much to his surprise, he found himself in a green world. As his eyesight slowly focused, his hearing also returned, and he discovered that he was in a place with chirping birds and flying insects. This was a forest. His entire body was in agony, and the pain suggested that he was still alive. He blinked and tried to move his body, but was completely unable to do so. He took a slow and deep breath before inspecting his own internal condition. In doing so, he discovered that both his soul power vortex and bloodline vortex had become extremely feeble. Many sections of his meridians had been damaged, and even his internal organs had been displaced. If a normal person had suffered these injuries, they'd most likely be dead already, but he could clearly feel that his body was slowly recovering. His immense bloodline power was surging throughout his body, repairing his meridians and adjusting his internal organs back to their rightful places. He wasn't dead. Was everything that had happened before real? Why was he in a forest? Tang Wuling was quite perplexed as these thoughts flashed through his mind. However, he knew that his top priority at the moment was to recover as quickly as possible. Only after making a recovery would he be able to uncover the answers to those questions. After waking up, his rate of self-regeneration immediately sped up. Under his control, his bloodline power was like an extension of his body, and he used it to nudge his internal organs back into place. After that, he quickly set about repairing his meridians, and at the same time, he spurred his soul power vortex into action so it could absorb the natural energies in the outside world to assist in his recovery. Thankfully, the natural energies here were very abundant, and he was a plant system soul master, so he was able to cultivate to great effect in a forest that was filled with plant life. After an indeterminate period of time had passed, Tang Wuling's meridians and organs were basically fully recovered. The pain began to recede, and some soul power had also gathered in his dantian. He opened his eyes again, and everything became a lot clearer to him. The first thing that he saw was a massive tree that extended all the way into the heavens. He rolled over and clambered to his feet. Thankfully, he still had his recovery ability. However, the fact that he'd managed to survive an explosion from a ninth-grade soul missile at point-blank range had to be a miracle in itself. Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly noticed that there was someone lying on the ground not too far away from him. She wore a white dress, and she was lying in a completely still manner. Tang Wulin's heart skipped a beat as soon as he caught sight of her. He dug through his memories and recalled the woman that had suddenly appeared in his arms at the last moment. He rushed over to her as quickly as he could before carefully rolling her over. A set of familiar and exquisitely beautiful facial features was revealed to him. She looked exactly like Naya, except this seemed to be a version of Naya that was 2 to 3 years older than she should have been. It really was her. Tang Wulin hurriedly laid a hand on her wrist to find that she still had a pulse, but it was rather feeble. Many sections of her clothes had also been damaged, revealing sections of fair and delicate skin. However, Tang Wulin paid no heed to any of that. He carefully cradled her up in his arms before injecting his mysterious heaven method soul power into her body. There seemed to be nothing wrong with her meridians, but her aura was extremely feeble. Only after picking her up did Tang Wulin discover that her back was completely bare. The entire back of her dress had disappeared, and thus, his hands came into contact with her smooth and fair skin. At this point, he had completely regained his consciousness. He could clearly recall that she appeared in his arms just as he was murmuring the words Gu Yue, I love you. Her voice was so familiar, but why did she claim that she was Gu Yue? Her voice and aura were both so familiar, yet she had the appearance of an older Naya. Tang Wulin was completely at a loss for what to think. That's right, her aura was one that Tang Wulin was extremely familiar with. Ever since he first begun studying with Gu Yue, they regularly came into contact with one another, and they'd grown up alongside each other for several years. During that time, she had become the most important woman in his life, so there was no way that he would mistake her aura for someone else's. There was a unique fragrance emanating from her body that belonged only to Gu Yue, and it was completely different from Naya's fragrance. So just who was this woman? All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Tang Wulin, and he hurriedly cast his gaze toward her neck. He clearly recalled that she had an ovular birthmark on her collarbone. It was very faint, and there was no way anyone would be able to notice it unless they'd appraised her in as much detail as he had. There was a birthmark. This woman was Gu Yue. Tang Wulin caught sight of the birthmark almost right away. Everything else could be faked, but a birthmark couldn't. But why had her appearance changed? Tang Wulin carefully began to rub her cheeks. He had learned disguise techniques, and he was hoping that Gu Yue was merely in disguise. However, he quickly found that this was indeed her real face, and even her hair had turned silver. He gently peeled back one of her eyelids to find that her pupils were now purple. Silver hair and purple eyes. Those were Naya's signature traits. Tang Wulin was completely flabbergasted now. He would be ecstatic if any one of Gu Yue or Naya were to return to him, but this woman seemed to be a combination of the two. He simply didn't know what to think. Overall, she felt more like Gu Yue, but her appearance. Could it be that Gu Yue had learned some kind of disguise technique that even he couldn't see through? That seemed to be the only possibility. Tang Wulin's heart was filled with complex emotions as he held her in his arms. Never would he have thought that she would come to him in that dire situation. He could still clearly recall that she had used her own body to shield him from that lethal explosion. Where were they right now? What was this place? In any case, his top priority was to revive her first. He carefully injected his soul power into Gu Yue's body, only to find that it was as if he were injecting energy into a bottomless pit. No matter how much soul power flowed from his body to hers, it would disappear without a trace, and Gu Yue didn't display any reaction to this, either. A thought suddenly occurred to Tang Wulin. He could recall that prior to Gu Yue's sudden emergence, he had felt a cool and refreshing sensation coming from his chest. He reflexively laid a hand onto his own chest, and his fingers came into contact with the necklace that Gu Yue had left him. The pendant was a silver scale, and as he picked up the scale, a theory began to form in his mind. Could it be that Gu Yue had left him this scale so she could teleport herself to his side in his time of need? In that case, everything made sense. This woman had to be Gu Yue. Why would you do this? Tang Wulin held Gu Yue's body tightly in his arms. If it weren't for the fact that she bore such a strong resemblance to Naya, he most likely wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to kiss her. At the very least, he had to wait until she woke up so he could ask her what was going on. Gu Yue remained unconscious, and after injecting his soul power into her body for a while, Tang Wulin was starting to give out, so he had to meditate to recover some soul power first. Thankfully, even though Gu Yue hadn't woken up, her aura was very stable. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.